Hi, beautiful ones. My intention with the Shamangelic Healing podcast is to be a platform that explores real-life issues and provides you with valuable insights and practical tools to support you on your journey of healing core wounds and reclaiming your power and manifesting a thriving, impactful life that you absolutely love. You see, it's my dream to inspire millions to shine. So if you find these topics valuable, please take a moment and share the podcast and leave us a rave review. This helps the podcast grow and reach the people that would greatly benefit from these insights. Thank you so much for tuning in and investing in your personal development. I'm right here walking this journey with you. So let's dive into this episode. Welcome to this very potent, beautiful episode of the Shamangelic Healing podcast, where today we're going to dive into sacred sexuality and how to peel back the layers and the imprints and the wounds that keep us from really honoring sacred intimacy with respect and empowered beauty and grace. And I'm so excited to have my dear sister. And when I say dear sister, Kylie McBeath is one of my inner circle sisters, like my core tribe, and a dear friend. She is the visionary co-founder of Zura Health, which is a digital wellness community. And she also, with her twin sisters, you can imagine two of these powerhouses together, running a wellness organization and also the Zura Health podcast. And she is just a visionary, a beacon of light. And I'm so honored to have you here, Kylie. And I want to let people know that there is to check the show notes for all of your details and where they can find you and your podcast, and that you were also on the Shamangelic Healing podcast before. We did the highest episode of downloads. We did, which was episode 18. So I invite everybody to go back and listen to that if you haven't, on releasing codependency in different types of relationships. And we do have a special free gift for everybody. And this podcast is for men and women today, where we're going to offer a free gift of sacred a healing guided visualization on how to release the core wounds for both men and for women. So I have different guided visualizations to help men and women with sexual healing and kind of releasing sexual trauma and stepping into their power again. So be sure to check the show notes for all of those details. And I just want to welcome you, Kylie, my dear sweet sister, to the show today.
Hi, Anahata. Such an honor to be here, as always, in conversation with you in this beautiful community that you've cultivated. Honored.
This is we've had this conversation about our own sexual distortions, our own sexual traumas, where we've given our power away in relationships over and over and over again, and the imprints that we both experienced in childhood and in our youth and well into adulthood, just where we acknowledged our own distortions. And so I just kind of want to dive into where the whole journey today is about looking at where these little imprints and distortions kind of sneak in, and it starts to inhibit the way authentic expression and our own sexuality looks. So, let's go back to where it begins. So, where do you think that starts in our journey as human beings on the planet?
Whoa, where do I think it begins?
Right? Yeah, we're going to dive in. It's going to be buckle up, people.
Buckle up. Sitting with that and really looking at, okay, where is the origin? Where is the genesis of the potential root of distortion? And I really do think it's intergenerational. I don't think we can actually have this conversation around our sexuality and sexual empowerment and sacred intimacy without looking at how we have been imprinted over generations. So that could be, looking at your mother's lineage of like how How were the women treated? Was there rape? Was there abuse? Was there an intergenerational imprint that potentially we might not have conscious context around, but it's still maybe showing up in our body? So I just want to name that, because I do actually think there are epigenetic factors that carry back to, I think science is saying now, 14 generations, that could potentially interfere with our capacity to feel safe in our bodies.
Right.
So there's that. But if we're talking just like coming straight out of the womb, where's this imprint? I think this is so layered, right? Because I think we've been born into a culture at large that, you know, if we want to name, we can call it overculture, we can call it patriarchy, we can call it just the world we're swimming in.
Yeah.
So I would say that most of those imprints not only come through the family system, but if we even look at a larger, grander scale, it's like what imprints into the family system? It's culture. So everything is swimming in culture. So that could be media, that could be how we're taught in school. Like this could be from religion, this can be from institutions, this can be from government. Like it can be from every institution, and really looking at how those all kind of combine to create this narrative around our sexuality. Because I think our sexuality, especially, I can only speak from my personal experience here, but is deeply feared and is repressed in our culture, and hasn't necessarily had the freedom to flow in the way that would allow its true essence to shine through. And because of trauma, and we can name trauma in so many different ways, but it's trauma for this conversation in this context, I'd say, is anything that gets in the way, blocks, represses, disconnects us from body, but also from feeling safe in our truest, authentic self-expression.
Right. I really appreciate that we're starting really at the origin around the karma and the bloodline, because not just through our mother's lineage, but also through our father's lineage of what has been passed down, how were children treated, how was sex treated, procreation treated. And clearly, if we go back 14 generations, this has not been sacred. Intimacy has not been what we inherited.
No,
not exactly. And so that is our opportunity and responsibility, knowing coming in. And for the context of this conversation, what we're really doing is peeling back those imprints that you're talking about. Okay, what did I inherit from the way my mother or father and in those bloodlines? What did I inherit that I have the opportunity to pass on or pass up? And decide that I don't want to pass this on to the next generation, which means it stops here. And the way sexuality has been treated, spoken about, addressed or not addressed, whether there's guilt, shame, power, force, indiscretions, traumas, is to say, okay, hey, this does not go any further from me. And so that would, if that's the case, and we know that there is sexual trauma or distortion in our bloodline, which is pretty much likely for everybody in some way, even if it's just oppression, but highly likely other deeper imprints than that, then, I look at it as remembering who we are before all of these imprints, and just peeling back the layers of the distortions, the traumas, the lies, the oppression, the deceit, the deception, and the desecration that has happened in both boys and girls through the generations. Starting with just your voice doesn't matter, or your body is not yours, and that there's not boundaries around feeling safe, like you said, in your body, whether that's energetically of it's intense, or there's yelling or screaming, or there's actually an invasion of one's personal space. With physical abuse or sexual trauma, is that okay, how do we start there in reframing and reclaiming our body, our space, and clearing ourselves from that bloodline karma before we go on to the next thing, which is more like, like you said, social media and the imprints of socialization on how we view ourselves. So how do you think we can shift that, from birth of what we took on in our bloodline?
Well, for me personally, it's always been about being able to name it
Mm-hmm.
and recontextualizing it and saying like that actually wasn't okay.
Yeah.
Or that wasn't right. And I think that right or just or in alignment with the sacred nature of our sexual organs. Like, I think there's so much distortion in our culture. So it's hard to be like, right and wrong is not the right language here. But it's like, there's just so many ways that we've been violated. And so like for me, and I know that you and I share this, but like looking at our timelines on this planet and looking at the first sexual experiences and kind of re-examining how our body, our sexuality, our innocence has been violated, not only by other, but potentially by self.
Of course, it goes both ways, and we get to look at from that programming and the distortion,
Yeah.
where we can sometimes be our greatest oppressor or violator by allowing energies in or out of our space from a place of ignorance or trauma or just not knowing boundaries. And it feels like there's an invitation early on to just claim the space, as you said, to name it, and also to claim, oh, this is my body. There is a boundary here. And I look at it like a little garden that says, hey, just because this person moved into my space doesn't mean that I have to allow that. And so a lot of times without that trauma or that experience being rewired, that says it's okay for me to honor this space and put a little gate around it that only I have the code, the access code to, allows me to be the one that decides if somebody enters my space physically, emotionally, energetically, or sexually. And I think as kids, we don't really know how to have those boundaries. Most of us don't know how to have those boundaries well into adulthood. And I think that is a start is to be able to say, this is my body.
Yeah.
And I decide. And I don't have to have guilt and shame about claiming the space, even if somebody else has a desire other than that, whether that is a relative or somebody in middle school or well into my adult life, that this is okay for me to claim this space as mine.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's vitally important for us all to start to become our own gatekeepers of our bodies, of our energy, of our energetic field. But it hasn't necessarily felt, or I'll say, it hasn't necessarily felt like an option, especially because of how much trauma we have, that we have accumulated, not only in our bodies, but like our nervous systems aren't necessarily coding boundaries as safe. And I think that's an interesting topic. There's a lot of nuance there. I know on Instagram we start talking like set a boundary, honor, and it's like, yes, and sometimes the nervous system is so used to that chaos or is so used to that kind of porous boundary where we're letting other people violate us or penetrate us with their words, with their energy, and it's like, okay, how do we, I think, cultivate internal safety first and foremost by doing this deep nervous system healing.
Yeah.
And for me, somatic experiencing work has been revolutionary in looking at and peeling back these layers. Yeah. Because until I could feel safe in my body, really intimacy isn't necessarily something that I can even cultivate.
Yeah.
Because I'm guarded, I've got mask on, I've got all this armor because it hasn't been safe. Yeah. And there's no judgment around that. It's like we're guarded, whether it's from a narrative and we're becoming our own best self-oppressor, or because because it's not safe in our environment. So it's like, it's a both and I think having these conversations about what we can do internally is so important. But I also think that we have to look at the external environment. Like, is it safe for me to open in my external environment?
That's this discernment that is like, is this going to leave me more whole? Is this going to respect the space? And it starts with us, I think, respecting our space and like learning how to advocate for that, and
Yeah.
and absolutely like nurturing that inner child that has in whatever way been traumatized emotionally, energetically, physically, or sexually, and to just go to that in a way in which mother, father, partner, lover, whoever, could not really do during those formative years of childhood or adolescence, or in our, like sexual youth, and even recently, just today, yesterday, like just going to that inner child part of ourselves and saying, I'm going to protect you now with my decisions and with my discernment and with my self-care and with being intuitive and listening to and being patient around, is this environment safe for me, and learning how to listen to that inner child when they're like, something doesn't feel right. And I think this is going back to honoring our intuition. As kids, we knew, hey, I don't want to go sit on Uncle Joe's lap. As little kids, we knew,
Totally.
I don't feel safe on this playground right now. And that began, oppression of our feelings and our intuition and our truth. And so there's going to be a reclamation of that as well, trusting our intuition, because as kids, we kind of knew when something didn't feel right. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that it's going to be a process of weeding out that there's no boundaries and putting a boundary, and weeding out that your intuition is false, and replanting that your intuition is correct, and weeding out the trauma and the pain, and then, planting seeds of nurturing and self-care and patience and gentleness in the process of, healing that part that has been traumatized, and like you said, honoring the nervous system so that it's not from that place of trauma that we're making decisions about who to open to in our adult sexual life. Because this is the thing, is those distortions are still, and motivations and imprints are still behind our choices today in adult sexual intimacy. And if we feel like we don't matter, then and we feel like that all we've received is disrespect, then of course we're going to attract a partner that disrespects us, and we're going to think, oh, all there is narcissists, everybody cheats, everybody lies, and we're going to be in this space that is where we keep attracting the trauma if it hasn't healed.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why doing that deeper work around trauma and really examining the layers of that trauma in the body, and how do I cultivate safety? How do I start to not only have the capacity to self-regulate, but then also co-regulate? And that's why I always recommend to clients or anybody that's craving this deeper level of intimacy, usually what's blocking it is sometimes things that we're not even rational about. Like, it's not even a narrative. It's just like the body is like, no. Or it's like, I want to move towards that because it actually might be beneficial, might be good, might be joyful, but the body doesn't trust that. It doesn't trust connection. So there's like this both and dance of like, I want connection, but I'm deeply afraid of connection. Because connection, people, unfortunately, when traumatized, they hurt each other. And that carries down in family systems, that carries down in our most intimate relationships. And so it's like, oh my gosh, how do I start to do the work to reclaim that innocence, to reclaim that remembrance of our intuition, of our somatic intelligence? And I think that first step is somatic sovereignty, like reclaiming sovereignty over our bodies.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned earlier in this conversation. And for me personally, I mean, if I look at my lineage, I mean, especially from a Well, yeah, I mean, from the sexual aspect, I mean, I was dancing with the shadow feminine or the distorted feminine. Really, it's just traumatized feminine, and sourcing power, sourcing security and safety through um, my sexual energy.
I think that's
And
pretty common. And, I think that's common when we're talking about the sexual imprints and of media as young boys and girls early on, when we see how a woman seduces, where we see how men overpower, and we look at pornography and the way men and women are portrayed at a young age, what women wear, how they get attention, and how that gets validated, how the less they wear, the more attention that as women, the less we wear, the more attention you get.
mm-hmm.
And so and it is woven in at a young age for men and women, these distortions, absolutely. And then that starts to inform, oh, I need to act this way to get the attention of a partner, or to keep the attention on me instead of somebody else. And so this is where we begin to be the oppressor of, where we sell throw ourselves under the bus, and our own respect, our own sovereignty, our own individuality, to get the attention, to keep a partner, to be liked as well. And so this happens. Now we're looking at how, well, we've kind of skipped over puberty, but I want to address that, because how we view our bodies turning from little boy or little girl into young woman and young man, and whether we view that as a sacred rite of passage, or whether it's talked about at all, and whether we're given, advice, direction, support about how to navigate our sexual currents during those times, or if we're just left to on our own to discover those things, or even worse, we have misguided information. And so I just want to ask you, around puberty, what was some bad advice, or did you just get nothing, that you got during your kind of like transition from little girl into young womanhood? What was that? What was something that you're like, oh, that was probably not the best advice?
I didn't get any advice, and it was like silent. And so I was kind of walking into a dark room alone, with no light, with no guidance, with no wisdom, with no elder, with no rite of passage, with no initiation that really marked this step into becoming a woman. And if anything, Anahata, I was deeply shamed. Like, my whole personality shifted at puberty, when I got my first menses. Like, I became withdrawn, shut down, and it was almost like in my body I knew, or there was some information that was like rising to the surface. It's not actually safe to be a woman, or you might be exploited.
Yeah.
And there was like, or you need to protect your womb or your capacity to have baby. Like, it was just like, at the time I didn't have any contextualization as to what was happening, but that's when my radiance started to really shut down. And that's when I became super guarded, hyper masculine, and really a father's daughter, where I kind of shut down the feminine. And like, I need to become more like the good girl, or the hard worker, the perfectionist, instead of being the wild woman that I am.
Well, and wild at that age without guidance can look like promiscuity and disrespect. And so there's this balance of understanding your power, but also knowing how to navigate it in a way where you're not giving it away or using it to manipulate. And what I'm hearing is that without any information, and also with just from perceptions around the attention that a woman gets, that it wasn't safe to be in the body, or it wasn't safe to be, a woman at that time. And I completely respect that. I also got like no information at all. And I think what I received from, my mom, who was very conservative and Catholic, and was just, we don't talk about down there.
Yeah.
Down there, she would say, like as if it doesn't even have a name.
Mm.
And so that, I think that, most of her programming, this is one of the things that passed us, depends on how our parents, how they viewed sexuality. And it seems like that second chakra, where all of our sexual energy sits and our emotion sits and our inner child sits, that there is a correlation to expression, like that it's not safe to express or talk about, down there, and that it's dirty or bad. And so I experienced a lot of shame,
Mm.
like if you touched down there or if you talked about down there. And so I early on got this understanding that it's taboo and it's bad, but it's part of your body. And this was something I didn't want to pass on, to my kids. It's just to talk more openly about your God-given body parts. This is your gender, and these are the parts you're given, and it's okay to talk about it. There will be urges, there will be experiences, there will be feelings, and actually just to open up the expression about it, so that kids are not having to just hear about it from their peer group or media or movies or pornography, or magazines about what it is to make this transition into a young man or a young boy, and how to navigate sexual urges and body changes and hormonal changes with more grace and respect. And it used to be that these transition times in other cultures and in other times of humanity were met with such respect and reverence, that this transition was a sacred rite of passage, and especially for women, a blessing to be among the tribe's members that had the ability to bring forth life, because only a small percentage of the tribe can actually do that. And men were taught to respect the feminine because of her right to bring forth birth. And there was a very different, traditional way of navigating those changes, with a lot more ceremony, reverence, and mutual respect. That those traditions got hidden and lost, mostly because the church was threatened by. One of the reasons is the church was threatened by the sexual, talking about sexuality in such a way. And when you oppress it, then distortions are created. And
that's just it.
Yeah.
That's really just it. It's really like, that's the nugget. When you oppress, when you shame, the more disconnected you become and the more distortions just take reign. They take over. And that's why sacred sexuality, I mean, is a beautiful concept. Seeing in our culture is not something that most people, if any, have access to, as like, who is actually modeling that, who's standing up and living in that way. When you meet a woman who's deeply connected to her womb and is the gatekeeper and honors her life creating capacity to birth on this planet. But most of us are unconscious,
Right.
Or not even unconscious, but just deeply traumatized and disembodied. And
using that sexuality instead of a sacred way to hook a man, to get attention, to get likes and followers. And actually, I think we're some of the greatest oppressors here around oppressing, our power center of the womb, from that place of disrespecting ourselves. And also for men that were raised to conquer, and they got validation for, being able to conquer a woman sexually, or to impose power. And then we have this culture of entitlement within men. And it has to do with media putting these images in front of men over and over and over again. So they're like hypercharged sexually. In a traditional tribe, we wouldn't be seeing that much of a woman that is keeping a man in that place of his primal sexual drive and feeding it and rewarding it.
Mm.
And if we look at any car commercial, any beer commercial, we get to see we're clearly, feeding that drive within the masculine to be supercharged and super sexually charged. And so it's not that the men are at fault either. We get to look at how they've been programmed to conquer, and they get that social reinforcement if they sleep around. And so we also get to see where men are holding their sexual energy with greater integrity, and in the minority of respecting a woman, or taking the time, and really being assured, with men and women, if we can go back to this courting where we take the time to actually get to know each other and build a bridge of a foundation of understanding, and where there are traumas and wounds, with clear communication, so that we know we're not scarring somebody by moving too quickly, or being too aggressive, or not communicating our edges, or, hey, I need to move slow here because I'm healing something, or I'm rebuilding trust because of a trauma or a betrayal. And men and women, to just, if we're not communicating back to the throat again, if we're not expressing, hey, I have a fear here, I have a trauma here, then we're likely going to be causing more wounds and trauma. And instead of taking the time after a dating experience to pause and drop in to kind of heal, we just go right into the next sexual experience. Right.
Reality 101.
So we talked a little bit about puberty, and I know that, with the men that I have worked with, when I've asked them about how their experience was around puberty, and when I've asked them, like, what were you hearing? And what I've heard from the men is, hey, keep it in your pants, son, and don't get a girl pregnant. Just like a lot of, hey, don't get a girl pregnant. So a lot of fear around sexuality. And, one of my clients, well into his married years, are like, who had erectile dysfunction, because every time he went to have, intimacy or an erection, all he heard was his mom's programming, keep it in your pants, sons, don't get a girl pregnant. And that is still driving his subconscious years later, when he's married and wants to be intimate. He's in a sacred experience, he's in a committed relationship, and actually ready. And that programming is so deeply ingrained. And then others talked about how they were embarrassed about, the sexual energy, and about erections and masturbations. And so a lot of shame, and a lot of closeting, and a lot of pornographic images at a very young age. And so many men have, shared that their addictions to sexually charged images started very young. And that too has been in the closet as well. And so that shame of hiding this, rather than having it spoken about and being guided, it's how to direct your sexual energy more appropriately and in a healthy way without shame. And so those were two extremes that, I've heard from my clients around navigating their own puberty, and how that carried over. And also the way men, locker room talk, the way men talked about women, and how, in order to fit in, that was the conquering language around sexuality in women was more prevalent than was more common than not. And so the fear to be judged kind of forced that, hey, get on board with this kind of languaging around conquering in the sexual arena.
Yeah, like sourcing social power based off of the validation through our sexual relations with women.
And what was happening in your peer group when, as you navigated puberty and then started hearing, like, what were the conversations that influenced you in, youth around how and when, to open sexually? Like what were the driving imprints or conversations there that affected your choices?
Yeah, I had a lot of don't have sex until you're married kind of
Mhm.
conversations and language. Um, so abstinence was definitely something. I went to a Lutheran school, so there was that, and then of course my parents were like, "Don't don't make that step because you don't want to get pregnant, you don't want to ruin your life, like blah blah blah."
A lot of
Um,
fear.
a lot of fear, just fear, fear, fear everywhere, especially around yeah, sexuality and sleeping with or having sex specifically. uh, STDs, like all of it, right?
Mhm.
So my imprints, I mean, I was deeply afraid of intimacy and of getting pregnant and of potentially getting an STD throughout my dating and I got married, so it's like I got married pretty young, so I really wasn't a sexually active person where I had multiple sexual partners even before I got married. My husband was number 2 on my list, so it was like you could just see how that kind of imprinted and was very much playing a part in maybe even unconsciously in that decision to get married. I haven't really necessarily thought about that,
Mhm. Mhm.
but I know that that resonates with a lot of people who are strictly religious. Need to get married in order to explore their sexual energies in that way.
Yeah. Which kind of
Um,
forces marriage kind of young too.
yeah. Oh, of course. And I didn't even know who I was when I got married. I was like a 21-year-old girl who thought she had the world figured out, but didn't know a dang thing about life. So yeah, there was a lot of naivety. I learned um, most of the information I received around sex and intimacy was from like the school bus, the older girls telling me about their experiences with boys, and I was just like fascinated. Also, some online um, portals and mediums where people were because I was deeply curious and I've always been deeply curious in a sexual being, and I don't find that there should be any shame around that sexual energy is our creative energy. It is the most powerful energy on the planet, and so when it's not channeled in harmonious life affirming ways, I mean, of course it has so many opportunities to get distorted through these other imprints like sexually charged images, things along that nature. But for me, a lot of it was how do I be the good girl, but also like the incredibly sexy seductress in the bedroom?
Mhm.
And it
Mhm.
was like, whatever I need to do in order to please that man, I will figure it out or I will learn. And so it was just like so much. And this is like cosmopolitan, like how to give the best blowjob. I'm like, why am I reading that at 18? Like, what are you talking about? Like, it was just all directed towards pleasing other.
Right, right.
Everything,
So
my
a
whole
lot
life.
of, and that's how you hook a guy, that's how you keep a
Yes.
guy. If you don't know how to do this, he's not gonna like you,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um, I I really wanna acknowledge that kind of, um, don't, you know, don't be sexual until, and then, I mean, what happens then if, okay, if I'm not supposed to be sexual, I'm not supposed to be sexual, and then all of a sudden it's a green light and you're supposed to know what to do and how to do everything. And it, like, where's the transition there?
Yeah.
And I noticed when I was growing up in that area, I noticed two extremes. The virgin was, ridiculed for being a prude,
Mhm.
and then the girls that were more promiscuous were labeled a hoe. And boy, the gossip about them, you didn't necessarily want to be that person either.
Yeah.
And so, but there wasn't great information about navigating the middle ground of, and this is where there's, without conscious courses or conversations or programs to help explain, hey, here's how you honor your sexuality, here's how to have a conversation about this with a potential boy or girl. And here's also how to navigate sexual orientation. This was not talked about at all, sexual orientation.
Yeah.
It was just assumed that you were straight. And so I think I also noticed at that time during middle school, I watched people that I knew that were not straight having to be forced to fit into a box as well. And
Yeah.
that's a whole nother layer of guilt and shame if it's not safe to be expressing same-sex attractions, and that there's judgments, or I have to pretend that I like this gender when I really like that gender. And so I also was watching a lot of people struggling, or a smaller population kind of struggling when prom came along or dances came along, and there's the option to take the opposite sex or don't go. That there was that gender expectation, sexual orientation expectation that didn't allow for other options. And of course, I'm a little older than you, and in these recent decades, there's more of an openness, obviously, with that now. But I remember just feeling like, without any information, you kind of had to navigate it on your own. And I kind of knew that was something I wanted to move slowly with personally. I not from anything my parents said. My sister was definitely more sexually active, and I got to see that modeled, and I was like, I don't think that feels like the way I want to go. But there's also this like pressure not to be the oldest virgin, but I also knew, which I wasn't, but I mean, see that? Like, I didn't want to be labeled.
Yeah.
Now going, hey, I wasn't that.
Right. But I wasn't, so.
So I guess I'm cool still.
Yeah.
Whatever. Like, it's still there.
Yeah.
But acknowledging that I knew I wanted my first time to be with somebody that I trusted, that I was dating, and it wasn't just a one night thing, but it was, kind of more tender and safe. And I knew that I wanted that for myself, not because anybody told me. At least I trusted my intuition in that space, which allowed my first experience to be very sweet and safe. And I want to acknowledge that that's not the case for a lot of people that are listening or watching, that their first experience might have been, non-consensual, that their first experience might have been, hey, I thought we were just fooling around, and all of a sudden don't know how to express or feel safe in expressing. I think this is going too far, especially if there's an insecurity to not offend and to want to appease and accommodate and make happy. So I believe that there's, another distortion here around expression of not knowing how to express a boundary, because there's no communication about how to discuss that before things start happening. And then even if you do express and it's not listened to, how do you navigate that? And men are not told, hey, seek consent. This is what a no looks like. They're only seeing these sexually charged images, and I want to honor that most men were not, and I think it's happening more now, but we still have a long way to go about hearing, navigating the conversations around consent, and that it's harder to navigate those conversations once the sexual energy is flowing and passion is flowing, and sometimes it's harder to express a no. Sometimes it's harder to hear a no when once the sexual energy is going, and I think that especially with women that are feeling insecure or want to accommodate and don't want to disappoint, can be left feeling an experience after, like, it was maybe kind of traumatizing, or not exactly sacred. And a man can feel like, a guy can feel like that was great. That was great because they had a different experience.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot to unpack here about expression and trust and intention, because there's a lot of, especially in uh, middle school and high school and into college, where there's a lot of drunken sex and sedated, like I'm not in my body all the way, or the other person's not in the body all the way. Not that you or I have ever experienced anything like that.
Never. Drunken sex? No way.
Yeah.
I mean,
God.
it's like looking back on everything, you're like, wow, Kai. Wow.
What?
That was interesting. Interesting choices. No shame. We're all learning. We're all learning. We're all having to relearn, unlayer, and really re-examine how we treat our own bodies, but also what we expect and what we allow in that sacred space.
Yeah.
And I think this is like a deeper remembrance around like the sacred nature of the womb.
Yeah.
And
for men too, like,
and for men,
the power to create life is a responsibility.
100%. I was just moving over to men. It's like these are the most powerful organs on the planet, and we've been treating them well. One, we've just completely disconnected from their power, and it's been playing out in ways that are exploited and manipulative and not supportive for either sex.
Yeah.
Right, for either sex. Like, and I think this is a deeper call into what does sacred intimacy look like.
Yeah.
And it's rewiring. Like all of those sexually charged images, or all of those like narratives around domination and like control, like those are so deep. And like the woman just like surrender or take it or what, like there's so many nuance and layers here. So it's like, I think to even begin this journey, like self-trust has to be so deeply anchored. And there's a lot of grief here. Like coming back home to the body, coming back home to the womb requires that we grieve all the times where we didn't honor ourselves, or we didn't have the voice, where we didn't know that it was safe to say no.
And I, like you said earlier, hey, no guilt, no shame. This is for everybody watching and listening, of just understanding that, hey, when you are told, trained, programmed to act a certain way, or to see yourself a certain way, or to see sexuality a certain way, or with no information and you're just getting it's just a trial and error experience, there's going to be a lot of errors. There's going to be whoops. There's going to be, that went a little farther than I wanted. There's going to be, I did not give permission for that. There's going to be, wow, I got a little too drunk and I wasn't really present with this experience, or I wanted attention and I made this decision from that choice. There's going to be perhaps sexually transmitted diseases from those times that there was less conscious or no communication around what is safe from that place, or about conception. And so in this place, if we're not able to express, and we're kind of feeling like, oh, we don't talk about what happens down there, that means we're also not talking about consent, STDs, and protection. Yeah. So like, because that's too embarrassing and that's not that sexy, that's not exactly a negligee when you're like, hey, let's talk about all of these things first. That can definitely be a buzzkill for the passion in the bedroom. And yet that is part of sacred intimacy. Having responsible conversations before we open into our most intimate spaces with people, and our bodies are the sacred space in which that container happens. And so that means that as all of us look back to our experiences, we're going to find some of these distortions and wounds in our garden, men and women, to be like, yeah, men might have moved too quickly. Women might have moved, with manipulation or seduction, overpowering, and all of this, and perhaps unwanted pregnancies, and any guilt or shame around whatever occurred from that. And so I think that Kai, with this, we get to be really gentle, men and women watching and
Mm,
listening, as we
yeah.
navigate and we look back to those experiences, and we look at the weeds in our garden, and we just pause and see what's there,
Yeah.
not from a place of judgment, but from a place of truth and from a place of
Hmm.
reckoning and presence that says, let me look at my past to see the distortions
Yeah.
uh, that are there, the
Hmm.
decisions I've made, the experiences that I've had, and let me start cleaning house, and let me be gentle with the part of me that didn't know any better,
Yeah.
or that learned a lesson about, hey, maybe I should communicate about,
Hmm.
um, you know, maybe next time I should have that conversation about protection
Yeah.
before getting pregnant. Like all
Yeah.
of these things that we kind of had to learn the hard way without discussion.
Yeah. So it's so important to have so much grace for oneself as we start to move deeper into the body and remember and reconnect to all of those weeds, name them, hold them, pull them out. What seeds are we planting in its place? Um, it's a vulnerable journey, and it's a one that I personally, and also with clients, like, it's can be a lonely path. Can
Yeah.
also feel like you're weeding out, so because it's like,
Like,
do you know what I mean? It's like,
you
oh
do.
wow, if we stand in that with that much integrity personally, and however that might look different for everyone, of course, because everyone has a different barometer here as to what feels good, true, and whole for them. But if we hold our partners to a certain level of integrity, of like, hey, like, I really want to operate in this space in a sacred way, or I want, um, it's interesting. I was talking to a girlfriend recently. We were talking about clean energy,
Mhm.
of like, are we entering into this exchange from a clean, pure space? Because there's so much, again, so much distortion when we go enter into the sexual arena, where it's like, ooh, that doesn't feel clean, or that there's something about that where it's seeking validation, where it's seeking control, power, like there's something that feels off. And so we have to have that level of attunement, of course, which is a deeper intimacy with body, with self, to even be able to name or identify that. And luckily for me, and not so luckily for me, is my body is so loud. Like, my womb, when I make a choice that is out of integrity with my womb, I mean, she's not going to let me get away with it. It's like, hey, that act you just did? No,
Mm.
never again. And it's like, oh gosh, but it felt like, in the moment, you're like repeating these probably 1,000-year-old patterns with a partner that have been played out over centuries in your family system, in your lineage. And then there's like a point in time where it's like, nope, that's no longer going to work. Like, there has to be an upgrade in how we relate in this area, because it's causing too much harm.
Right. And that's the difference between just letting our primal sexual urges run the show versus, will this leave both parties more whole? Is this the right
Yes.
time? Is this the right intention?
Yes.
Am I in the right space? What is the motivation here? And I think
Mhm.
this is the difference between, our animal instincts to survive and procreate, which with 7 billion people on the planet, we're not really concerned about the species surviving, besides like the other issues.
Right.
From a procreation
Yeah.
standpoint, we're not like going extinct from product, that there's not enough humans on the planet. So we get to be more aware and more conscious with our choices there around
Mm.
checking in with, what is my motivation behind seeking a partner right now, or swiping left or swiping right, or
Yeah.
what is the 3 date rule? Okay, I've got to be sexual on this date, or if I like them, then I need to do this. And like, taking a pause to look at what is the motivation behind each choice, whether it's what I'm wearing on a date, whether it is why I'm seeking it, a relationship in the first place? Is it because of loneliness? Is it because of I'm wounded and I don't want to feel the pain? Is it from a place of boredom? Is it from a place of I'm feeling like I need love? And is it coming from that place of needing, wanting, grabbing, and reaching? Is the motivation coming from a place of emptiness?
Yeah.
Or resonance? And this is why I created this Sacred Sexuality for Women, this like 4-week series of like awakening that womb and going through each of these experiencing, removing the weeds and sacred ceremonies and healing journeys to reestablish the fertility of the garden of our womb. And this can be done for men too, but this particular series is for women. But you know, the value of going through each, like the karma of the bloodline, puberty, and how we viewed our bodies, our first sexual experiences, healing the traumas, and then looking at every partner. What was my motivation? What did I learn? Any traumas, any whoopses, any that wasn't excellent, or like, you know,
that was fun.
That was, I don't remember that one. So, you know, like whatever it is. And that has been a really beautiful journey to walk women through that process. And walk it through myself, and creating sacredness where there was desecration by my hand or others, and to rebuild that space, and also check in. What is my motivation right now? Am I actually ready in this space internally to be in an intimate space? And I think so many of us, from a place of loneliness or emptiness, just reach for another relationship and reach for another sexual experience on top of or overlapping in a way that doesn't allow for men or women for us to reclaim our sexual energy and revisit the traumas or the distortions from the last blank number of relationships, so that we can learn how to evolve our behavior instead of repeat it.
Mic drop. Like, there it is. Like, I mean, I couldn't have said it better. You're right. Like, and that's why for me in the last year, doing the no man diet, which, because I date men, at least currently. Till
otherwise notified.
Yeah, until otherwise notified. Was so deeply sacred, because I removed all external manifestations of the masculine, so that I can not only heal my own inner masculine, my own inner protector, and protect and allow there to be enough safety for my feminine to rise in my body, because it's never been safe for me to be in my feminine in my life, except for when I was a child. But creating this external container or internal container around not dating for 6 months or being in any type of romantic relationship with men triggered some of the deepest. I mean, it was wild, Anahata. Like, I was in tear, and I was like, why am I? Because there was like such a deep anchor or hook into needing for my own survival, for my own validation, for my own existence, that I needed to be receiving validation, receiving energy from an external partner. And until I did the deeper work to, go back down the timeline like you described, heal all the distortions, all the violations, and that to self, done by self, all of it. And through my lineage, was I able to come back into a deeper space of remembrance, because I was no longer sourcing anything from the external. So there was no longer an opportunity for distortion or for an opportunity for that old pattern to hook in again, because I was like, no, I'm done. Like, I have to make sure that I actually do the excavating work, because if I ever go down that path again, I mean, it just will. I mean, I don't even know if my body would survive it. Like,
and then we're just going into traumatic relationships where we're reliving our trauma, and we're also triggering partners as well, as we, as we are there to bring about whatever their distortions are and bring it up for them.
Oh,
This is where what you've hit on here is the value of celibacy at different periodic celibacy
yeah.
instead of serial monogamy and just dating on top of dating on top of dating. And then there's never this space to individuate and come into one's own core. And I was listening to this other guy that is, specifically supporting men's sacred sexuality. And he's like, brothers, you need to break your pattern of sexual addiction. And it goes for women too, or relationship addiction.
Yeah.
And, this brother was just talking about celibacy. And this guy in the audience was like, listen, dude, I did your challenge and I lasted 2 weeks and I was crawling out of my skin, no masturbation, no calling, no texting, no hooking a woman for her attention.
Yep.
And this guy was like, look, I'm crawling out of my skin. There's no effing way I would make 6 months. You're nuts. And he goes, look, if you really want to be free, you're going to need to face your desire to keep reaching for a woman and reaching for attention. And this is where the men have the opportunity to heal their sacred feminine so that they can source self-love and not get it from another woman or from another, expecting it from another man. And in that space of celibacy for women, we also get to witness how often we hook or source or flirt or get the attention of a man or to feel supported or feel seen or feel beautiful or feel loved, any of those things. And this is really the deep shadow work around where we have been, back to codependency, where we've been sourcing another person for love, validation, safety, support, money, attention, sex, to feel worthy, loved, and whole. And if we're ever going to be in a relationship where sacred intimacy is the foundation, then those patterns are really going to need to be dissolved so that we're not taking that into the bedroom and creating distortions in what would otherwise be a conscious relationship. And so even with a soulmate relationship, if we're not coming with clean sexual energy, we're going to use, let's just talk about this for a second, about the different ways sex can be used as a power play. And so whether you've used these or experienced them, what are some that you can identify? And I'll share some that I've noticed, either that I have used or witnessed or been on the receiving end of.
Ooh, well, I've seen it play out just to create a power dynamic, just to uphold the power over. So like the need to control or the need to be the more powerful one. I've seen that play out in the sexual space of taking on the role of the submissive, of taking on the role of the like almost yeah, I guess I'll say submissive.
There is a balance there to be able to,
but not from a clean space.
Yes, exactly.
Like it was like, I'm playing in this, even though I know deep down that this isn't serving whole or in alignment with me right now because it doesn't feel clean, but I'll keep it here so that you feel good about yourself.
So that's kind of appeasing the partner.
Yes.
But in the way it's not clean, it's at the expense of myself.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that there is when it's clean, it can be like, hey, I trust you to lead, or you get to receive, and there can 100%. Be this beautiful communication around, hey, whoever is going to lead, or are we collaborating, but that's different.
Yeah, that's different. I'm totally here for that. That's actually what I'm looking for. I've seen like hooking in for safety and security. Yeah. Like I've seen this pattern play out, not in me personally, but in a lot of people where just when the relationship's going to rupture, the woman gets pregnant and you're like, like, oh, like heartbreaking, but it's like another way to hook in and create some stability in a already like chaotic.
Which is a total illusion, and it is a power play to try to hook a man with that, to to keep somebody. And I think that's another way in which sex is used, is that I'm using sex to keep a relationship going, even though that's the only thing that's holding it together.
Exactly. Yeah, I've done that too.
Yeah. Like, instead of have this real conversation about what's happening, let's just have sex.
Yeah, let's eroticize our pain.
Yeah, and not actually so in that way, the sexual experience is an avoidance tactic and a distraction, to actually not address the core issue within a relationship, and
which is re-traumatizing.
Yeah, because then it really isn't safe.
Not safe.
Yeah, because we really haven't addressed the issue.
Right.
Another one, so I don't want to lose you. I don't want someone else to have you. And I see this happen a lot, is that, I have, where man or women up level the sexual seduction, men or women, to be able, I don't want anybody else. It's over, things are dissolving, but it's too hurtful for me to see you with somebody else. So I'm going to keep flirting or keep engaging sexually, because I want to keep you myself, because I don't want anyone else to have you. So there's that juicy bit.
Yeah, that's a nice one.
Yikes. That's that, like, jealousy and security triad. And then there's also the, I want to take you away from that person, whether that is a married person or somebody that's already dating, is that, hey, if I lure you away sexually from men or women, lure you away, maybe you'll be mine. And so using that to get somebody to leave somebody else.
Yeah.
That's
those betrayal wounds.
Yeah.
Are, and especially if you're dating somebody, which I historically, part of my patterning is like, and I think this, again, is survival based, because we live in a patriarchal system where women have had to source survival externally through a male and their status and power, is like, when you choose a male who's based off of the society, is powerful in their status and their money and their resources, it's interesting to notice, at least it has been interesting to notice for me specifically, of the lack of reverence for the female in that relational dynamic, or of like, I want that because I know my life will look better, or I'll be freer, or and it's like, whoa, not so sure. But like, it's just an interesting dynamic that you see play out when unfortunately we live in a system, in a culture that equates power to something that is material and external, which isn't real true power. It's
right. So this is where a woman becomes arm candy to a sugar daddy. Yep. And this is where the self-abandonment that says, I'm not sovereign, I need him to support me, and that illusion only lasts so long until that woman's replaced. And then later in life still doesn't know how to stand on her own 2 feet. And so and that's a form where we barter, for men or women, where we barter something to get something. And this is just, we've all done this. This is the archetype of the prostitute for men or women, where we sell a part of ourselves to get power, to get ahead, to get money, to get material things. Any of that. And so there's that archetype for men or women playing the prostitute. It doesn't always have to be sexuality that we're trading.
Right.
But
that's such an important one to be able to name.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's really prominent.
Well, yeah, because that is something where men and women have used their sexuality to get ahead in business, or to sell more, whatever in there. I mean, if we just look at social media alone, and we look
the
at
objectification, the sexualization. Oh, it's getting younger and younger. I'm like,
and more bold and more bold and more bold. And there's an overcompensating there that says, but this is me reclaiming my sexual power, and it still doesn't feel clean to me. Because we want to be able to reclaim our sexual power in a way that doesn't distort ourselves at the
Yeah.
same time. And I believe that there's a way to do that
Yeah.
and still, be in an integrity, um, and find our power and our truth, in a way where we're still not prostituting ourselves with the illusion that that's power. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And so this is like every choice checking in
Yeah.
and like looking, what is the motivation behind this
Mm.
post, behind this clothing, behind and like really looking, is it clean right now, or is this the voice of a karmic imprint around shame? Is this, I have to reclaim my power from a sexual trauma, so let me overcompensate?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I want attention, or I'm feeling lonely, and so is it a pulling energy? And
Mm.
it feels like the sacred sexuality is going to be a place that is coming from one center,
Yeah.
and not leaning, pushing, or pulling, that is able to navigate sexual attraction without
Mm.
abandoning self. And I think that that's really where the journey becomes, is
Mm.
a level of like internal awareness, to listen and pause,
Yeah.
what's going on in my internal field, and am I moving from a place of integrity right now?
Yeah.
And I noticed that, years ago, I was like, I choose to leave the heart space. And a mantra that I claimed one year, this would be like 15 years ago or something by now. And I remember saying a mantra when I was just, in my awakening journey, of saying, I choose to leave the heart space of others more whole than I found it.
Mm.
And when I set that intention, I became
Mm.
more conscious of the motivations, and whether or not, even if it was consensual, whether or not this, this sexual energy exchange between two people at whatever level, is it clean? Is it going to leave us both more whole? Is one person wanting this more than the other? Does one have different intentions than the other?
Mm.
And I realized that, wow, there were, when I put it through that filter, it made me pause a lot more and step back and say, you
Mm.
know what, this is not going to leave us both more whole.
Yeah.
And like listening to that deep level of respect, and realizing this isn't just about a primal sexual urge or attraction, even if it's consensual.
Yeah.
It's more about listening into someone's heart space, because they might be consensual and just getting out of a relationship and really wanting to source that
Mm.
experience for pain,
Yeah.
because of their loneliness, which is really not necessarily the medicine that they're needing. And I think that that's
Yeah.
where, as men or women, we can actually hold our sexual energy and realize that this is a time to support their grieving and their healing,
Mm.
not to muddy it with sexual energy right now, because then it becomes unclean. And men and
Mm.
women keep saying, oh, I just need this sexual experience to heal. And it's actually like, well, what if we showed up with love and support in a non-sexual way that actually allows it to heal in a clean way?
Mm. Yeah. 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 Much more fruitful when we move from that space. And I love this invitation of taking a pause and really asking and connecting to the truth. And it's like, okay, now once we have the truth, like, are we using our voice to speak it? And I think that's like the next layer is like, ooh, unconditionally okay enough in me to potentially hurt somebody else's feelings, right? Because and I know this is just more so my pattern of like caretaking and taking on everybody else's well-being at the expense sometimes of my own. And I think that's a common pattern for women, that we're having to like really break. But it's like when I stand in that integrity and honor self, it's it's not it's not just one way liberation, it's two way. It invites the deeper excavation or inquiry into what is it that we actually need, or what's out of alignment, and what would bring this into alignment or a clean space, so that we can actually experience and repattern intimacy in a way that is sacred and nourishing and in alignment with every center of our body.
That's what sacred intimacy is that
Yeah.
level of expression, ownership, accountability, vulnerability, and really being present. And this is the
Mm.
invitation, I think, where this whole conversation is
Yeah.
leading to is, first of all, the deep inquiry. Where am I at? And
Mhm.
what weeds are in my garden? What distortions are there?
Yeah.
Where can I begin to see those things that are clouding my judgment in ways in which that are not allowing me to move forward with a sacred respect
Mm.
and a divine embodiment of my own space, which means I get to know my own space and not abandon it because there's pain or a lack of safety or a fear or wounding, but actually move into that space, take ownership, and listen to what is needed and heal the wounds. And that's a process. And so when we are going into intimate space, with that healing in process, then a level of communication with a potential partner so valuable to be able to name and express, hey, I've noticed this pattern, or I'm healing from this trauma, or I'm doing my best to make different choices in
Mm.
how and when I open and why. And I'm also wanting to become aware of what is going on in your internal
Mm.
landscape so that I can be mindful in your sacred garden that I'm not leaving weeds there. And so then that invites a partner to do their inner work and for us to hold space for that experience and to allow a communication about
Mm.
how can I honor you without hurting you.
Mm.
and and even though there may be this desire to rush through that process, to be patient, and that desire to just be like, hey, let's let our sexual urge just run the show here and bypass all of these necessary steps that build a foundation of trust, so that real sacred intimacy is built on
Mm. Yeah.
experiences that allow us to be vulnerable and heal the wounds so that we're not continuing to deepen the scars.
Yeah.
And I noticed in my healing practice that a lot of couples that are great
Mhm.
break up just because there has been rewounding and rewounding and rewounding without the healing, and just the sex won't, just the sex doesn't, just great sex, even though we're at each other's throats all the rest of the time and we're arguing all the time,
Mm.
and not having the tools to actually navigate the other parts of the relationship, that there's this big conflict and a big explosion of the relationship because we keep hurting each other and just can't handle any more hurt.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
if they just had the tools, if they just had the ability to heal the wounds that have happened in
Yeah.
the relationship at each other's expense because there was bypassing or not communication, or the foundation of trust and intimacy and vulnerability wasn't established, or just our masked shallower selves have
Mm.
been the ones in the relationship, and the deeper wounded vulnerable
Mm.
parts of ourselves have been hidden and are not expressing, then
Yeah.
they come out in unhealthy ways, maybe. And that leads to betrayal.
Mhm.
That leads to infidelity. That leads to physical or emotional abuse in relationships when we keep wounding the other party, or they keep wounding us. Then kind of more passive aggressive
Yeah.
experiences start.
Starts to escalate over time, and then it gets to a point where it's like, "Ooh, this actually is so toxic that we or the body will let you know." And then it's like, "Okay, time to separate and really examine." And, working in the field of relationships, it's like I think there's something so sacred about what you mentioned around this opportunity to remove the sexual energy out of the dynamic, whether that's just like celibacy internally. Like I've seen relationships do that as well, where it's like for the next 3 months, we're not going to engage in that way. And to really look at the imprints here, to really look at all of the narratives, all of the violations, all of the desecration, so that we can actually pull out the weeds, whether we're in relationship or not. But this is fundamental, that we really start to look at how what has been planted, or the weeds that are growing in our gardens, be really examined. Because until that is examined, I really don't think we can cultivate a foundation, like you're saying, of trust.
and
Of
and safety,
Yeah.
and back to sacredness, so that when there is a coming together, and this is really the whole premise behind sacred intimacy, it's two whole beings,
Yeah.
or beings that are intending their wholeness. They're on their journey of wholeness, and accountable for their distortions, and willing to talk about it, and willing to address it, willing to be vulnerable, willing to be seen.
Mm.
And this is the foundation of sacred intimacy, is so that when we do come together in that intimate space, it is with integrity, it is with internal alignment, it is with transparency, and a level of a trust that has been built over time, so that the sexual experience can go deeper. It can be even more vulnerable. The edges, the walls, and all of the fears begin to drop, and both become submissive in that way,
Mm.
because there is a willingness to merge into the abyss of the experience of love, when there is
Mm.
not story, projection, power, and control blocking the space of a beautiful experience.
Mm. If only we could surrender into that, Anahata.
And that's the bill, everything that we've been talking about is how we
Right.
get there, I
I
think.
know. I think so too. I mean, I 100% am in full alignment with that, that this is the path to getting to that place of surrender, of activating something so beautiful that maybe we haven't even yet experienced in this lifetime. I'm sure some have, but like there is something so sacred about that union when it's coming together with two whole beings,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, that can be so deeply healing and liberating and um, yeah, powerful.
I call that the ultimate blissgasm.
Yes, the ultimate, the ultimate.
And that it's a heartgasm as well, so that
Mm,
because that we're not having the walls around the heart,
yeah,
and we're not seeking love from the other. We are that, we are
yeah,
connected to that, and that becomes permeable in a safe way for us to merge into the abyss of that,
mm, yeah,
the heart center in its fullest expansion. And we're not, I'm trying to get that from you, or
yeah.
I have to release my anger into somebody else, or using sex, as a stress release or an emotional blanket.
Yeah,
Those, we have other experiences that are more aligned,
yeah.
for that kind of energy, healing. Is there anything else you want to share with our audience, about the journey to sacred intimacy, or conscious relating, to help them navigate this, before we close out? Because it's just been so juicy, and I know you and I we could go for days, and we have actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was such a beautiful conversation. I love listening to your wisdom and how, yeah, just how beautiful you express and understand this from so many different viewpoints. I've told you that, and I'll continue to tell you that. It's like there's you create such a beautiful web for us all to be seen in these conversations. So thank you for that. I'd say that for me, like one of the guiding internal statements that I tell myself, in really walking this path, is to trust your truth and like speak it when you're afraid. Like just speak. Like there's nothing more liberating than actually trusting what is true for you in that moment in your body, And the more we can trust that truth, the more we can trust ourselves. And then I think not only do we feel safer, but the people around us feel safer as well, because they can feel when things are off. People can feel it. They might not even intuitively know, or they might not consciously know, but intuitively they know. And when we start to bring all of us into the container of the relationship, and it is safe to do so, there's something so beautiful that can blossom in that space of truth. Truly, like truth of like, I'm unconditionally okay. And this is where I think we have to get to internally before we start cultivating these relationships. I'm unconditionally okay whether you go, stay, leave, whatever, like I can contain all of it because I've sat with all of the parts that have been fragmented, that have been afraid, that are angry, that are sad, and I can contain myself, which when I can contain myself, I can sit in wholeness without trying to control, manage, and maneuver where this goes. And of course, that's a path and that's a journey. And I will continue to walk this path of soul for until I leave this planet and come back again. So I just really want to offer that up of like, trust your truth and get the support you need to come back home to the body and reattune to safety.
You are so wise, my sister. Just that, everything that you just said, it just so wise to be okay, whether a person comes or goes, whether you're married, single, divorced, whatever is happening. And to just I believe that is truly unconditional love, so that we're not also in this attachment space. That love means you have to stay. Love means I'm only okay when I'm with somebody, like, and just to navigate the releasing of all of those attachments so that we can actually not have agenda in relationship. And gosh, that is a practice, and that is the classroom that keeps the opportunity, serving it up for us to keep looking at. And your journey and what you've experienced in your years, and the gifts, the perspective, the awareness, the ownership, the accountability, the integrity with which you walk, and with which you talk, and with which you are really exploring your own truth. I just appreciate, because it's so vulnerable, it's so honest, it's so beautiful, and I just have a deep respect for your wisdom and the life experiences that have served these things up for you, and just have the ultimate respect and appreciation for your life and what you do and how you walk on this planet, and how you do so with radiant, humble beauty.
Yeah, thank you so much for those
yes.
Sister,
tell people where they can find you, because I know they're going to want to find you.
Yeah, the best place to connect is over on Instagram at Being is Beautiful. I tend to hang out there a couple times a week. So yeah, if you want to engage with me, my work, my thoughts, my journey, that's the best place to find me.
Mm-hmm. And then also the website. What's the best website that they can?
Yeah, my personal website is KylieMcBeath.com. Yeah. And yeah, you can tune into more stuff there. Yeah, websites are so funny. I know that maybe they're making a comeback, but yeah, I need to get back on there. But yes.
So we will make sure to have the link to your Instagram, and also to your website, and also to your podcast, and also the one where you were on with me on the Shamangelic Healing podcast, which, like I said, for everybody, this is a must listen to. Our chat about codependency, breaking the habit of codependency, was deep. Like I said, it is the most listened to episode. And so thank you for that. As always, people love you on the show, and I'm grateful to have you back, because there's such a deep wisdom within your soul and your being, and it's just so easy to digest the way you express it. And so I thank and appreciate you for that. For those of you listening and watching, two things: a free guided meditation, one for men and one for women, around healing the wounds around sexuality. So that is a free gift. If you want to go to the show notes and grab that gift, of guided visualization for sexual healing for men and sexual healing for women. And also we have coming up in August, and we'll offer this at different times, but this is the sacred Awakening the Sacred Feminine, which is a series, a 4-week intensive series where we walk through all of these imprints that we talked about from womb and conception and the karmic all the way through, body images and sexual traumas and puberty and, just navigating the whole thing. And we do this in a very tender, in a very safe, in a very private way to weed out the garden with guided visualization, healing ceremonies, and sacred, replanting sacred experiences, so that we can rewrite those patterns around how we move our sexual energy, and looking at old partners and whoopses and any guilt or shame that is in the space. And it is so beautiful, the experience, just like tears of gratitude for those women that enjoyed that journey with me last time. And that, so we are offering that again. So check the link in the bio, or on the Instagram, which is at Anahata Ananda. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. As always, you can find me on shamangelichealing.com. And that gives you the opportunity to see all of the upcoming events and offerings. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, if you found this conversation inspiring, helpful, valuable in some way, please share it with another sister or brother that you think would benefit from this conversation. Leave us a rave review. That always helps us. And thank you to Kylie for walking your medicine path and sharing your life with others. It's beautiful to be on the receiving end of you, my dear sister.
Love you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Go forth and shine.
Much love.
Blessings.